Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have a fantastic roundtable with Dr. Milo Wolf and Dr. Pack. They're back on the show and we're getting a little bit of an update on them, how they're doing personally, how's their training, nutrition going. Then we dive into an area that they've been very interested in, that is health. And that is relating to what aspects have they changed within their lifestyle to promote better health outcomes for themselves. As lifters, what things should we be focusing on? Do we need to worry about adding cardio to our routine? Is high rocks the way to go? And we talk a little bit about some of the influencers that are in the space that are promoting certain protocols and how beneficial really might they be for us. And we dig into health and that subject to quite a large extent, talking about ultra processed foods, talking about blood tests and their relevance to us as lifters. As a side note, before that, we talk about MyoAdapt. The guys are working on this app that they've been working on for years now, and it's actually going to be released quite soon. If you guys are interested in learning more about that and the guys, links in the description to learn more about it. And as a reminder, at Revive Stronger, online coaching is our bread and butter. That's what I do on a daily basis. I coach people one-on-one and we take them towards a bodybuilding stage, or it might be just a photo shoot, or it might just be to feel better, get healthier, and also work on things like their relationship with food. Make bodybuilding, their training, nutrition, all of that complement their lives overall. Actually, one of the things we spoke about in this podcast specifically was some of these health aspects just get built into your routine. So you don't even have to think about it. It's like brushing your teeth. And that can be so beneficial, and you won't even necessarily recognize it once you've been doing it for so long until you get those taken away from you. You know, if you go on holiday and your routine is completely disrupted, you're like, oh, I really feel the knock on my well-being. Whereas when it becomes your new normal, when you are having sleep disruption or you're not focusing on your nutrition too much, then you don't really notice the downsides. And that's not great. So we work on all those sort of behavior aspects too with our clients. It's not all about just looking and feeling better. And actually, on this episode, as a final note, we finish with kind of quick fire, overrated, underrated. So enjoy that one as well. But without further ado, let's get into the chat with the boys. So Milo, Pack, it's great to have the duo back onto the channel. You guys can't actually have, what's it called? Wolf Pack. There's actually a big brand that means you can't have that officially for you guys, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a backpack brand. Very successful, actually. But
yeah.
Unfortunately, they beat us to the punch.
You need to have changed your last name to P-A-C-K. That would have been, then you could, or P-A-C. Can you do that like Pac-Man? That would have worked. Change your last name for the greater good of your branding here.
Or could just call ourselves the Androulakis Korakakis Wolf.
Or quite like it. Not the easiest to pronounce. Obviously, we're just talking off air, and you're both just saying, "Hey, you're just grinding away at the moment. No kind of big updates on your end." But I always like for people that are like, obviously, Pack, you strength trained primarily. You haven't stepped on the bodybuilding stage, but obviously Milo stepped on the bodybuilding stage. I'm always interested in people who also don't just think about what they do, but also do. I'd love to get an update on how training, nutrition, everything is going on your end. I don't know if Pac, you want to start. It looks like Milo maybe is having slight issues. There we go.
Yeah, for sure.
We might.
He just exited. But he knows more than anyone how things are going. Yeah, hypertrophy training, as I've been doing for the past like 5 years. Despite being very busy, we're still getting it in 4 to 6 times a week using our app MyoAdapt to do that, to direct the entirety of my training and Milo's training. But yeah, the one thing that is always relatively solid, no matter what else is going on in our lives, is training. Even when we're traveling, even when you see us in New York or anywhere else, we are always getting some form of a session in according to our usual schedule. That may change from a 1 hour session to a 40-minute session with supersets. But yeah, mostly hypertrophy training, and it's all going well.
Solid. Yeah, I know when I came to visit you guys at your, can I call it like a lab, or I call it a studio, a gym, where like all these things, but you had your own kind of fridge and cooking facilities, everything there. Like it was clearly, you guys take this very seriously, like it was stocked up with protein shakes, which I appreciated. But yeah, Milo, how are things on your end? How's training going? Obviously, it sounds like you're using MyoAdapt as well, which is, for the listeners, if they don't know, that is your app.
Yeah, man, it's been all good here. I've been cutting for about 3-4 months now, taking it very slow, um, getting from like, I don't know, 15 to 18% body fat down to closer to 10 maybe. Um, and yeah, it's been going well. Can't complain. MyoAdapt has been very nice. I've actually been using it for a year now behind the scenes, over a year, exclusively to train. So that's been nice. We are slowly approaching launch. I'm not going to give any dates yet, but that's slowly happening. But yeah, just trying to, as I'm sure Pac alluded to as well, take everything to the next level as far as the content goes. So trying to improve the quality of each and every piece of content, script it out more carefully, make content that hopefully will be informative and evergreen to the extent that it can anyways, right? Because obviously science updates itself, but make content that is accessible, educational, and can last a long time in terms of not aging or still being applicable for the most part. So yeah, everything all good on my end. No plans of returning to the stage for a while, but just enjoying training and keeping on, as they say.
When I hear of evergreen content, the person that comes to mind is Andy Morgan from ripbody.com. For those that don't know Andy, he's been on the podcast a few times, and obviously he's part of ripbody.com, but he's also does a lot of the editorial process for the Muscle and Strength Pyramids. And people know Eric Helms from 3DMJ as part of that. And I know he did tons of great articles like that. Other people will probably think of like Lyle McDonald, bodyrecomposition.com, obviously Stronger by Science. We've got Greg Nichols there with those fantastic blogs. So I think evergreen content is the way to go. I say that knowing that I quite often appeal to the short-term stuff in regards to like Instagram. I know that Instagram isn't like your guys' mainstay. It's YouTube is where you put most of your time and effort towards, isn't it?
Yeah, no, for sure nowadays YouTube is our main platform. I do think there's value in more novel content where it's like, oh, this new study came out and this is how it changes things. Equally, I think that sometimes with that sort of content, if it's not contextualized properly, you can suffer from a form of recency bias, and I think this is actually applicable to lengthened training, where people will look at the results from the most recent study, and because they haven't necessarily followed literature that closely, or because it just came out and it's freshest in their minds, they will assume that that overturns the rest of the evidence, or that study is more heavily weighted compared to the rest. And I think that if you make a lot of content that focuses exclusively on novelty, like you're constantly saying, new study finds this, new study finds this, new study finds this, as much as that's helpful and it is ultimately still science communication, if you don't make an effort to contextualize it properly, it can leave people with the idea that, hey, this study is more important, or that is what the overall evidence says currently. And I think that some content like how to train, well, two things. One, if it is a new study that is more of a meta study, like a meta-analysis or a systematic review, then that sort of conclusion can absolutely be more warranted. But if it is a single experimental study, you probably shouldn't be making that inference. However, to go back to the evergreen content stuff, I think that content that is centered around how to train, how to apply some of these findings will be relatively timeless. Like, yeah, sure, compared to 10 years ago, maybe now, on average, you place more of an emphasis on the stretch. You take slightly shorter rest times, or you do a bit more volume, or what have you. But by and large, things remain a bit more consistent because there's so many different things that go into training, and people need to know how to train. Now, in 10 years, in 20 years, people will still be training. So it's kind of evergreen in that sense versus like, new study in Korean students finds that lifting improves your IQ, or something like that. So that's how I see it, and I think that having a mix of it is good, and I think that different platforms incentivize different types of content. But I think sometimes more could be done to contextualize new study findings and that sort of stuff.
I absolutely agree with you on that. And that recency bias is huge, not only potentially for the person who is trying to communicate it, but for the onlookers. So many people look onto it and then they they don't even read the other kind of carousels that are part of the post or the caption that contextualizes a little bit. They just jump onto the new commentary there, and it's like, oh, this is the new thing, and this is the way to do things. Well, you can think of the countless examples like that. And actually, I was just listening to James Steele, which I know you guys both worked under him for a period of time, and he had a comment on, I think it was the Iron Culture podcast, and he basically said like he doesn't really pay too much attention at all to any new studies. He's basically just waiting for a meta-analysis. He said it in a better, more swift, I can't quote him precisely, but it was in a sense along those lines. And I've spoken about this loads of times on this podcast. So I come back to this bead model of truth that I remember Alan Aragon kind of presented to me, and it was a sense of like 100% we know this versus we're either like 100% knowing or really not knowing, and it's like moving us further along this. It's never like 100% in either one direction, and that's always a way that I like to conceptualize it. But yeah, the Evergreen, the only struggle I guess with YouTube videos is, unlike a blog post, you can go in and edit a blog post and update it, but YouTube videos you have to redo the entire thing, which I know how much effort and time can go into make. Like, you could do little effort and time, but if you're doing the sort of content you guys are doing, it takes a heck of a lot for the majority of your videos. Obviously, if you're just doing a training video or what have you, it maybe isn't quite as much. But when you're trying to do an overview, like a meta-analysis almost of the literature, like that's hours of scripting, recording, editing, potentially redoing. So yeah, it's paying off though, right? How are you finding things, Pack, with YouTube?
It's in the literal sense is not paying off, and allow me to say this on there, because I've seen some claims that, you know, you're not getting paid from research, but you get paid from social media. That calculation needs to factor in costs, then income, and then, you know, net profit. So yeah, it's paying off in terms of like doing good work as far as science communication goes, and we're still learning things, but there's still a very long way to go for it to like become a proper thing like some of the big content creators in our space. So it's a grind for sure, but we're really enjoying it. It's cool under Milo's guidance to learn more about like videography, and obviously learning how to script things and trying out different approaches to how we structure a video. But yeah, the feedback has been great. So in that sense, it's paying off. In terms of us being able to do social media science communication as a job, unfortunately, from YouTube specifically, because that's what we do as well with Stronger by Science. From YouTube specifically, it's not there yet, but it's getting there. As you know, it's a grind.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know if I wanted to make like this podcast full time, it's a scary prospect, and I don't even know if I'd be able to do it, but I'd have to give up so much other time towards things that actually generate income. The amount of times I've considered various projects and things outside of just one-on-one coaching and always come back to just, man, I love just one-on-one coaching. It's more of a guaranteed, a great way to make a living. So in some sense, it's a bit of a risk, and you're investing now, hoping there's long-term dividends. If you probably both actually invest in the stock market. I'm looking at what Trump's doing, and it's crushing some of my investments. And I'm like, I'm just going to hold out. It's going to pay off I'm not selling out now. Maybe I'll even buy if I'm that and not risk averse. But you mentioned the app a few times. And were you hoping to have had it launched by now, or do you have a launch date now in mind? Is it kind of hard to even have a launch date, given maybe it's been delayed from the looks of your faces?
Oh man, can of worms.
Yeah.
It's been in the works for 3.5 years now. As is the case in many startups, like we've effectively gone unpaid this whole time, which is fine. And that is the case for many people and many startups, so I'm not really saying that as a point to evoke pity or empathy or whatever. But it's also been more work by a long shot than we had anticipated, and I think this is like a common story again in startups and whatnot. But I think that is partly due to the fact that we are taking a pretty different approach to app design than most people. Like, looking at competitor apps, things tend to be relatively straightforward in how they approach things. They take a relatively pragmatic approach wherein you are effectively guiding people towards a template program that is going to be more or less suited to them. You might adjust volume overall downwards a little bit based on their overall recovery, or maybe you reduce it slightly based on their overall recovery. Maybe you tailor slightly how much volume they're doing for different muscle groups based on what they said that were important. But fundamentally, it is all a core program being upscaled or downscaled in some regard. And so the degree of true individualization is relatively constrained. Importantly, that sort of template-based approach does mean that you are not truly individualizing in the way that a coach would. Because ultimately what a coach does is they kind of, usually for good coaches or experienced coaches who've kind of refined their workflow over time, they will follow a series of decisions, like a branching tree, going decision by decision from what is sort of most fundamental, like, oh, how many days can they train? Like, how many workouts should they even program for the week? To how much time do they have? To what are their priorities? To are there any muscle groups they want to emphasize? To how is the recovery overall? Maybe that influences volume. It's kind of just a branching tree that eventually leads you to a program that is one of many, many iterations, right? And if you, Steve, got two individuals that were almost the same, but maybe one had slightly worse recovery, that might still influence your program overall. But in the way that many of these apps work, the true degree of individualization might be a bit constrained in that in the end you get maybe 10, maybe 100 different programs. And that's kind of the cap on that. But ultimately there's more than 10 or 100 different people out there, and they might need slightly different approaches. And so we essentially try to mimic the decision making of a coach, but as an app. And so we truly did follow that sort of like branching tree approach where there is no template in MyoAdapt. It is all just iterative, and it builds question upon question until it arrives at one of a virtually incalculable number of programs. Like we actually sat down, I want to say like a year ago at this point, and tried to do the whole like multiplication of multiplication of multiplication to see how many different permutations of programs could exist with MyoAdapt. And it was genuinely like an off-the-page number. So that's why it's taking long, because when you allow for such freedom and such individualization, you also open the way for issues, ultimately. And that's why I say that most apps opted for the more pragmatic approach, because if all you're giving people is 10 or 100 different programs, and ultimately you can very easily predict and set constraints on what can happen. And so most people will get something pretty reasonable pretty easily. But again, there are inherent limitations to that. It's hard to update, it's not truly individualized, and so forth and so forth. All that to say, this app is pretty complex, and we have a lot of stuff in the work. Like I'm talking genuinely functionalities that are truly science-based, but that most apps wouldn't even consider. Like, for example, one thing we have now, I can say this, is the app will make predictions set as to your performance based on meta-analyses that we have. So, for example, if you log a certain performance for your first set, it will make a prediction for your second set based on average data of how many reps will you get on the second set compared to the first. So that then when you're inputting your set, you don't have to manually input everything from scratch. It kind of makes a prediction and maybe you need to adjust it by 1 rep, right? There's many small features like that, and over time we'll tailor that to the individual, etc., that have taken a long time to figure out. All that to say, timeline-wise, we are genuinely not far off launch now. We have been in closed beta for over 2 months now, and feedback is very good. Like on average, we're seeing about now 4.2, 4.3 stars out of 5 as a rating. So for a closed beta app, that is pretty good. And again, like we've been training with it for a year now, and by and large, very happy with it. It's immensely nice to be able to outsource your training and to not have to worry about it again. I'm sure if you've worked with a coach before, you've kind of gotten that feeling, but in this case, it's with an app. And, you know, like, if I'm busy, I'm getting to the gym, I only have half an hour, I can on the spot say I have half an hour and it'll replan the workout for me, prioritizing what's most important in that workout. Like the muscles I haven't trained the longest, making sure that I get some volume in for more muscle groups. So it truly is, hopefully, the best app on the market. It's been a long time coming, and we should be launching in the very, very near future as of this podcast being released. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to give any release dates that we can't stick to ultimately.
Yeah, it's become a bit of a meme, which is understandable. But at the same time, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes in both our professional and personal lives that have had, knock-on effects. We're obviously not going to come out and explain all the development timelines and the challenges that we faced, but it's taken such a long time because it is something truly unique. And yes, Milo said, beta has gone great. We've had a few hundred people tested. Many are still using it, so there's feedback coming in literally every day. And yeah, we are finally very close, but as you know, we're balancing a lot of things simultaneously. So yeah, people see all the content and the fact that we're active, and they assume, oh, these guys are out there, just going on about their life and making, making a living off YouTube, when in reality it's all a continuous grind to, one, educate, two, prepare the app, and in generally just help fellow lifters.
Yeah, the feeling I got from you describing that, Milo, is in the way I work with people is I have there's just different check-in frequencies. So I have had before checking in with people just like every mesocycle. So they run a block. And then that's always when you do that, it ends up being like a predetermined timeline quite often. And I don't love that. I like auto-regulating those. And then so often there's so much time that's passed that I haven't been able to be there to kind of troubleshoot and be a coach during the weeks, like this app would every session or what have you. That so much has happened where I'm just not confident in that being a good way to coach. So I actually just kind of completely got rid of that model. And I only do weekly or bi-weekly, maybe every month. But that puts so much kind of pressure onto that individual to have to make wise choices week to week. And it's obviously a financial thing, but I love working with people. I want to talk to them frequently for the exact reason you said, because if you can't, then you aren't being able to cover these kind of things that inevitably happen on a fairly frequent basis. And yeah, when you have a coach that can decision make, it's easy. But when you have to think of all the questions and scenarios that could potentially happen that someone might have, and you have to build that already into an app, yeah, I can see that being hard. I guess you could have, I don't know if there's any way of doing this, but you could have a ChatGPT integration or something that could try and do this. But I think I don't know if you guys agree with me, ChatGPT is definitely not infallible.
Yes. At the risk of sounding a lot more educated about artificial intelligence than I am, because I'm really not. As far as my experience with ChatGPT for fitness, it's basically like a smart parrot of whatever's being said on the internet. So if you give it the right prompt and you tell it, hey, what does the scientific evidence say about volume? It will effectively parrot what it sees on the internet and give you that. But it's not it doesn't necessarily have the wherewithal to construct a good program as a result. It's basically the average point of what the internet would recommend, I'd say. Which isn't bad, but it's also not what we're aiming for here, which is not true artificial intelligence in the sense that it's algorithm-based, but we're not integrating language models to have them write your program. Because again, I don't think, as you said, it's quite at that stage yet, and the scientific evidence can tell us things that ChatGPT isn't necessarily aware of just yet at this point.
Yeah, that's totally fair. But exciting. This will probably come out in a little over a month. So I imagine it might be close. And yeah, I guess then you'll continue to learn, get feedback and develop it. And it's one of those things where it's hopefully going to set you up for future success in many ways and be a lifelong project in many ways. In terms of another question I had, this is a bit random potentially, but I was speaking, I think, to Pac, the fact that you guys had taken quite an interest in health and longevity and that sort of arena. I'd love to hear kind of where that's taken you, any lifestyle changes you've made personally, because I think, I don't know if it's just my age or the age bracket I'm getting into now, mid-30s, moving into that direction, and the people I surround myself with, and obviously have people passing away or people coming down with illnesses that are close to you, and you start to think about these things more. I'd love to dive into that subject. I don't know if anything comes to mind for either of you in terms of lifestyle changes you've made after perusing more of this area of research.
Shall I? Yeah, so we're both pretty health conscious. We've been, I think, since we met, more or less. As far as lifestyle changes goes, I don't think there's been anything too drastic in the last few years. Maybe, I'll let Milo speak for himself, but from my perspective, I'm still aiming for around 10,000 steps per day, 4 to 5 lifting sessions per week, maintaining a healthy waist circumference, eating 25 to 40 grams of fiber per day, doing my best to get whole foods in and fruits and vegetables, as well as maintaining. The one thing that I guess we started looking at a bit more was sleep regularity, as that seems to be a better predictor of all-cause mortality than sleep duration per se. Not that sleep regularity was bad back in the day, but thankfully we've developed a bunch of habits that are now on autopilot that I think tick all the basic boxes. But the more we've been looking behind the scenes into health-related literature, the more we've seen that, as long as you're doing a few basic things, the rest is not that deep. Even if you look at, let's say, BMI, which doesn't necessarily apply to lifters, like the risks increase substantially after like class 2 obesity or something along those lines. And in general, we've seen that as long as you're physically active, lifting some weights, and not and you're not freaking it as far as like visceral adiposity goes, sure, you may be at an increased risk, but it's not as bad as people thought, which is crazy, because I do feel like a lot of people out there would, in my opinion, right, and this is out of my lane, but I do feel like it would allow them to get going and perhaps pick up exercise a bit more easily if they knew that they're already not at a horrible place. I think that makes it a bit more manageable versus thinking that, I got to go from, walking 5,000 steps a day and being somewhat overweight to being an athlete if I want to be healthy. If those people knew that, just add a bit of lifting on top of it, maybe lose a little bit of weight and maintain it, and you are likely pretty healthy. I think that would help. But yeah.
Yeah, it just reminds me of like if you have a huge pile of laundry, you might be more tempted to put it off, whereas if you have a tiny pile of laundry, you can just throw it in, get the wash done, and you're cooking. I think with health, as Pac said, there's not really been a ton that's changed recently. I will say we have both grown more familiar with the literature on the topic, so we are not medical doctors. This is not medical advice. But I think a good way of seeing it is that there's a number of quote-unquote myths that people tend to fall for when it comes to health that may not hold as much water as they think. So one is, as Pac said, the association between BMI and worse health outcomes. BMIs of like 25 to 30 typically, your increase in relative risk is pretty marginal usually. Like we're talking a 5 to maybe tops 15% relative risk increase. And that's for non-lifters, mind you. So if we're talking about lifters and your BMI is between 25 and 30, I would suspect the relative risk increase for many outcomes, like all-cause mortality, would generally be quite negligible. So that's one thing. And generally, it's kind of, people sometimes think that it's more of a linear increase. As BMI increases, your risk of worse health outcomes also increases that way. It's more of an exponential. So if your BMI is really high, that's probably bad news. But if your BMI is slightly elevated, that's probably not nearly as detrimental as you might think. The other things that come to mind is, this is an obvious one, but I still think people don't really focus on it, is consumption of just fruits and vegetables. So there's several meta-analyses on the topic. There's one I'd like to point to where you do see a pretty substantial decrease in all-cause mortality risk going from consuming none to just 5 servings a day, or about 400 grams a day. That's about a 25% decrease in all-cause mortality risk. It's pretty substantial. But then from 5 to 10, you see another roughly 5 to maybe 10% decrease in relative risk of all-cause mortality. So that's a relatively big one. I think another myth, I would say, and this is, I'm ready to say it's not as firm of a belief as like more steps helps you, eating fruits and vegetables helps you. But I do think that in the fitness industry, there's kind of this meme of once you've been lifting for sufficiently long, you eventually become one of a few archetypes. The BJJ guy, the hybrid athlete. You stop lifting, or like you do maintenance only training. You stop training legs. Like there's these few like things that tend to happen once you've been training for a while. And I think one of the things that's been happening more commonly recently has been hybrid training, where once you've been lifting for a while, you kind of start reincorporating some running, maybe some VO2 max training. And I think that in the industry, specifically in the more sort of like gen pop science sector, like people like Andrew Huberman, Peter Attia, the idea that the optimal protocol for longevity is composed of strength training sessions, some cardio, some sunlight exposure, etc., etc. And it's kind of like almost a laundry list of things. there's definitely some truth to it. Like, strength training has its benefits, cardio has its benefits, and they are somewhat distinct in the physiological adaptations that they elicit. But ultimately, the idea that specifically lifters need to do cardio to be healthy, and that if you're skipping cardio, then that's for sure detrimental to your health in a meaningful way, I think is overblown. For one, I think people tend to think that lifters are out of shape, and that can be true. Like any population, you'll have people who can be out of shape. Like if you take a super heavyweight powerlifter, their VO2 max scaled to their body weight might be relatively poor. And would they benefit from doing cardio? Potentially, probably. But I think then it becomes more of a matter of talking about like a super heavy powerlifter might have a BMI of over 40 comfortably. So with VO2 max specifically, the idea that a higher VO2 max is beneficial for longevity stemmed from a few papers, but one primarily being a meta-analysis, or rather a systematic review actually, by Mansago and colleagues, where they divided people into different groups based on how high their VO2 max was in a prospective cohort study. Now, for one, they didn't actually measure VO2 max directly, they estimated via a different test. So the validity of the measurement is slightly questionable, but with a large enough data set, assuming the assumptions are reasonable, it'll still be in the right ballpark. However, the bigger issue is that they effectively, again, split people into groups from low to high all the way to elite. Elite being the top 2.5 percentiles of people. So if you put 100 people in a room, the 2 to 3 people with the highest VO2 maxes would be considered elite, whereas the bottom 20% would be considered low, and so forth. Below average, 20 to 40, above average, 40 to 60, and whatever it was. So that's how they categorize people, and then they effectively follow them for about 10 years, I believe, and they checked, okay, well, do the people with lower VO2 maxes on average have a higher risk of dying over those 10 years from any cause? And generally, there was a trend where the lower your VO2 max, the greater your risk of dying over that 10-year follow-up period. The issue with that is that, effectively, remember, they split people into groups based on how high their VO2 max was. And for sure, the 20 lowest percentiles, the low VO2 max people, low fitness people, did suffer way worse outcomes. However, once you got to sort of like an average point, the difference between the average person with an average VO2 max and high and elite performers was pretty small. And specifically, you have to contextualize where the average lifter would fall within that sort of distribution. And we had a study on lifters by Hong and colleagues where they had a group of participants who on average needed to squat, I think, 1.5 times body weight, but they actually squatted 1.7 times body weight. So if, Steve, you weigh 100 kilograms, you need to squat 170, right? In this study, on average, they did that anyways. And their VO2 maxes, by this study's definitions, would fall in the high to elite group. So already in the very high performers. And the difference between high and elite in that study was very, very minimal, if any. So yeah, the idea that lifters who are generally of a healthy body weight, who perform compound lifts for multiple reps throughout the week, and who are generally pretty physically active outside of the gym, need specifically to improve their VO2 max to really improve their health by a substantial amount is probably not true. For one, I think that lifting itself can be a pretty good stimulus for improving your VO2 max as a standalone. And for two, just getting steps in outside of the gym can also provide some benefits, at least in untrained folks, and I think it can be enough to raise your VO2 max from below average to at the very least above average. So yeah, all that to say, I think that the focus on VO2 max for health in lifters is probably misguided. And if you look at the evidence on behaviors and health outcomes, what you quickly realize is that you get severely diminishing returns. So like if you do 3 to 4 hours of vigorous activity a week, you're getting most of the benefits of physical activity already. And most lifters are doing substantially more than that. So adding in even more cardio on top of your lifting routine, on top of also getting, say, 6, 8, 10, 12,000 steps in per day, that is a lot of activity. And at least when you just look at the behavior side of things, there's not really evidence that doing 10,000 steps a day plus, let's say, 3 to 5 lifting sessions, and then adding on some cardio on top of that wouldn't necessarily improve your health, just as far as like behavior to health outcome relationship goes. So yeah, I think VO2 max is a big one, and it can be tempting to construct this really complex protocol of, okay, I'm going to do some lifting, but then I'm also going to do some steps, when in reality, the basics of pick a form of physical activity that you like and do a sufficient volume of it to obtain the benefits, which, again, with around 5 to 10 hours a week of vigorous activity, or, well, around 5 hours of vigorous activity or about 10 hours of moderate activity, like steps, for example, you will get effectively all the benefits of physical activity. So yeah, and then there's also things like, so BMI was mentioned. I think that a better metric would be waist to height ratio, which I'm not sure if Pat mentioned that in much detail. But for one, people tend to overestimate how accurate their body fat percentage estimates are. So people think that they have a tight grasp on their body fat percentage based on their scales at home or based on their visual estimate or whatever, which they probably don't. And on top of that, people think that you need to be leaner than you really do to be healthy. So if you look at the research for men, at least on an observational level, for men, the lowest risk of all-cause mortality is around 22%. For women, it's closer to 30%. So you don't need to be that lean to be in good health, at least on an observational level. It's possible that eventually we'll have randomized control trials where we make people overeat a ton and then track them over 10 years. For the time being, we don't, so all we have is this and some mechanistic rationales. But chances are, if you're in the high teens-ish as a man, you're fine. Maybe even in the low 20s. If you're in the low 30s as a woman or high 20s, you're also fine. But in the fitness industry specifically, I think the idea is often pushed that aesthetics equals health to an extent. So in reality, a better metric of health would be waist to height ratio. And again, I'm going to give a guideline of the research generally finds that being under 0.5 waist to height ratio is a good thing for health, and that above this, risk starts to increase. So if, for example, Steve, you're 180 centimeters tall and your waist is under 90 centimeters, you're probably fine health-wise. But if it starts to get above this, maybe your health starts to get worse. But again, it's the same thing as BMI, where the risk increases do not really seem linear. And in fact, you can go a fair bit above 0.5 and the risk doesn't increase all that much. But it's once you get to higher and higher waist to height ratios where risk really starts ramping up. So similarly as BMI, it's just more of an exponential pattern than it is linear. So yeah, I think those are the general health myths and just things we've learned about over the past few years that I think relatively few people in the general population are aware of. But I think that if they were aware of these things, they would have a bit more peace of mind when it comes to their health versus falling for every single supplement or every single new protocol that can optimize their health.
Yes, Brian Johnson comes to mind. Me and Greg Potter recorded a podcast not long ago where we talked a little bit about him and some of his protocols. Actually, there's a guy doing some, I guess, like investigative research and I don't know, yeah, some bits and pieces on him. I've seen some of his reels pop up where he's like, is Brian Johnson just cake? I.e., he's not real, he's just a cake, like all those reels that come up where it's like, is this a tire or is it a cake? And it's like, oh wow, cake can look really realistic to the point of thinking that's a tire. But yeah, so Brian Johnson and some of his supplements, it's like, man, I mean, the supplement industry for its sake is risky anyway if it's not third party tested and all that stuff, and it seems like he's maybe faking some of his blood work anyway. That wasn't where I was trying to go with this, is but yeah, I think from the outside in too, you touched on a really good point there, Milo, where you kind of mentioned when people look at the fitness space, they almost associate aesthetics with health, and like people might look at people on stage, and obviously the listeners I don't think will think this, but I think that's like the pinnacle of health, these bodybuilders on stage, and it's absolutely not further from the truth. Like there's many healthy aspects, I guess, that they're doing, but yeah, that level of body fat, when you get to an extreme, as you kind of mentioned, any extremes are not going to lead you to great health. But I think for myself even, and probably a lot of the listeners, like when you look at people will have this preconceived bias of someone who maybe looks more or less healthy when they're a bit higher or lower body fat, but it's actually like, hey, you can be relatively high in body fat, especially if you don't, I guess, hold it all around the navel, which is probably not ideal. So where you're holding that. And then it's interesting you mentioned the research looking at kind of all-cause mortality and fruit and veg intake, because I looked at that a while ago and I was like, oh, I can kind of see where they came to that 5 a day recommendation, because there's almost exponential benefits, and then it kind of continues to linearly go up to 10, and then after 10 it kind of continues to kind of go off / plateau. And I'm actually surprised how easy it is to get, for me at least, once, as Pac said, like once you've got these habits in place, it just becomes part of your day. I can get like 5 or 6 vegetables just within like a salad with a meal, and it's not as hard as what I think some people like to make out. And then my final point, cardio. So I have a preconceived bias of being like not against cardio, but of that belief of I find it hard to think that adding additional expenditure, however that is, on top of what I'm already doing is going to make me even more healthy. And to the point, some people will even argue that doing cardio alongside, like for bodybuilding specifically, will benefit your bodybuilding. And I'm like, if you have the kind of recovery capacity to do more cardio, surely just doing more training volume might be a better way to go about it, or more recovery to propel that. So I have a hard time thinking, hey, cardio is inherently beneficial for bodybuilders. And like you mentioned, if you're doing enough activity through the day, it doesn't seem like it's going to have a huge impact on kind of your health. And there had a roundtable with Eric Trexler and Menno Henselmans a few months ago now, talking about that aspect, and they are very much along the lines of what you said there, Milo. It's like, hey, especially if you're not sedentary through the day, if you're splitting up those walks through the day, all those things, like you don't have to stress as someone who's training 4+ times a week, getting a good step count, about trying to add cardio on top. But I do see it as a bit of a meme where people are just like, cardio, like doing this for health. It's like, don't know. And just the final point I guess I'll make is these protocols that I see out there. And this would be a side I'd also appreciate both your guys' thoughts on, is sometimes I see this, and then this stress it induces in individuals where they can't adhere to this specific protocol, like their morning routine or whatever it is. They forget their blue light blockers and they're trying to go to bed and they're like, oh, I can't because I've seen too much blue light or whatever it is. And they start stressing. And I worry for like the mental health side of things, and like suicide risk is a real thing, and all those aspects. So I love to hear, especially with like social media and the impact that can have negatively on mental health, and how you guys spend probably quite a lot of time on social media. Any thoughts surrounding that at all? I guess, Pac, if I pass it to you first of all.
Yeah, I do think that like figures like is it Ryan Johnson or Brian? Brian? What's
Brian.
Liver King's name?
Oh,
Liver
Is it
King?
Brian Johnson as well?
No. Liver King is name.
yeah. What is? I feel like he's
Brian
Brian
Johnson
as
Yeah,
well.
Brian Johnson.
Wow.
That's so weird.
Is the other guy Brian or Ryan?
Yeah, Brian Johnson
right?
as well. Wow, just a I versus a Y. Incredible.
Great. Yeah, I think that the biohacker Brian Johnson, like, I get the schmick and the whole gimmick and whatever. If he wants to do all these things to himself, it's good. But I think the messaging of like, I'm spending millions to live forever sends this this false message that the epitome of health or maximizing health is only, can only be achieved with these secret, science hacks that normal people don't have access to. Or like he posted a video the other day that I saw yesterday where he was like, oh yeah, I went for a routine MRI scan and they found that I had this condition, and all the comments were like, yes, the classic routine MRI scan. And then some neurologist explaining that it was coincidental that he found it. It wasn't. Anyways, whatever. I do think that they send or create this false idea that you have to really go out of your way to be healthy. Obviously, genetics, load the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. Like, if you have certain genetic predispositions as far as health goes, you may be doing everything right, but still have like high blood pressure or high cholesterol or whatever. But I'm not a big fan of all these sexy protocols. I get the appeal, but the messaging should always come back to be physically active, do your best to eat mostly whole foods, maintain a regular sleep schedule, and keep your body composition in check. With that meaning, like, keep your waist circumference in check, and the rest is likely icing on the cake. And you can see that as well in many countries and societies where you have people that live relatively stress-free lives with relatively good genetics, and they live up to, they surpass the age expectancy. But I guess we'll see whether all the biohacking will actually have an effect in the next 40 years or so. But yeah, those are my two cents.
What about mental health, Pac? Anything there?
It's not. It's way out of my lane. But I'm personally a big advocate for seeing. And actually, my psychologist just messaged me, as you said it, no joke, on my mother's life. And she said, "Fatso, stop messaging me. I'm not a psychologist. I am the." No, I was just rescheduling an appointment. I'm a big fan of seeing a therapist and just taking care of your mental health in that sense. However, we've talked about physical activity being beneficial for mental health. But mental health is multifaceted, and it's not just, the gym is my therapy. Like, obviously being physically active and being social and all that stuff can help, but I do think that everybody could benefit from going to therapy for a period of time just to explore it and see if there's anything there.
Well said.
Yeah.
Go for Milo.
Just go on the data side of things. We have a whole podcast episode on lifting and mental health and activity and mental health on Strong by Science anyways. But in the course of doing the research for that, you basically just realize that all of the benefits that you see of physical activity for physical health are basically also there for mental health, whether it's reducing the likelihood, at least on an observational level, that people will develop a condition to begin with. Like, if someone's physically active, they have a lower chance of getting things like depression, anxiety, and so forth. Or whether it's managing symptoms thereof. So if you already have it, but you start doing physical activity, you will generally experience reduced symptoms of depression, anxiety, and whatnot. Obviously, I'm not going to speak to anything else, but I do think that when it comes to protocols being recommended online, it is very, very often completely missing the forest for the trees. Like, when I look at some of those supplement routines or like supplement intakes, protocols, people online will market the number of supplements being taken with extremely shaky evidence behind them relative to the emphasis being put on the modalities that we have pretty high certainty help you is often pretty out of whack. And that is very frustrating, and it's often the case in the biohacking sphere or the sort of like morning routine sphere, where the completely wrong things are being focused on, at least in terms of evidentiary basis and in terms of potentially magnitude of effect, in favor of focusing on things that have no evidence behind them and that potentially do nothing, potentially do harm, potentially just waste money. And it is very frustrating to see from the outside, and it's a different niche than we're in. Like, Steve, I'm sure you agree, we speak to a certain niche for the most part of lifters, and I think that the biohacking or health niche is a slightly different one, and it's difficult to break through with simple messaging to an audience that has heard over and over again that these individual supplements will really, biohack their health, and it's frustrating. So, yeah, that's my experience.
Todcat Alley is the one that's coming to mind now, if I've even said that right, where I hear that regularly promoted by people seemingly very scientific, and it's just like, man, please, like, the evidence there is not particularly strong at all. And like you said, it could be even doing more harm than good because we don't have enough evidence to necessarily say either way, and then that's a lot of time and energy and money put towards things. But I do sense biohackers, I feel bad saying this in some way, but they maybe lend themselves to being like conspiracy theorists at the same time, where they kind of feel like they're ahead or they're doing things that others aren't, and they've kind of got an edge, and maybe they like that sense about it. So yeah, but I don't think it's all bad. I definitely think, for example, Ryan Johnson probably could argue he's a net positive for just highlighting some things, but definitely people end up focusing too much on the fluff that's really not going to be doing much. And the worst thing is if, like you said, Pac, if people focus on how much money he's spending and then they're just like, man, I'm not a millionaire, I can't do any of this stuff. It's like, we just need like to focus on some very basic stuff that we can all do. The last thing, actually two topics I want to touch on before we move on is, one is not an MRI, but blood tests and infrequent or frequent blood tests. I don't know if you guys think that as like natural bodybuilders doing all these good health behaviors, we should worry about maybe checking under the hood semi-regularly. And yeah, let's start there. I don't know if who of you want to start. Milo, you're nodding, so I'm going to pass it to you.
I think Pac actually has more to say about blood tests than I do. He's been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
Go on.
So I do think that infrequent but still somewhat periodic blood work is a good sort of educated approach to having a rough overview of your health. So like once a year or something. However, it's important to know that blood work will not necessarily give you the entire picture as far as your health goes. So you hear that a lot from enhanced bodybuilders, where they go like, "Oh, my blood work is excellent, therefore I am healthy for sure, 100%." I do think that a basic blood test covers most people, and as to see if things like your cholesterol are in check, your blood sugar and stuff. But at the same time, if you don't have any symptoms at all, and you are ticking all the above boxes, as well as not have any sort of genetic predisposition to things like high blood pressure. So if you know from your, from your life experience that that's not an area of concern, I wouldn't be too, I wouldn't say, yeah, you must do your blood work to make sure that you're healthy, especially if you're at a younger age, and especially if those blood tests will eventually come as part of like routine health checks every few years. So there's been a surge in blood test providers, in the UK, like we've seen Thriva and all sorts of cool services, right? Fair play. But I think some people do get a bit obsessed with the tracking aspect of both blood work and also body composition, where they think they must be tracking things all the time to sort of prevent anything bad from happening. But yeah, if you don't have any symptoms, you're physically active, sleeping regularly, healthy body weight, healthy diet, and so on and so forth, it's unlikely that's, you're all of a sudden going to have high blood pressure if you've never had it before, or your cholesterol will be off the charts. But yeah, a good thing to do once in a while. However, it's not the be all end all of health.
Nice. Yeah, very well summarized. Very similar to my thoughts, where it's a case of it's not a must, but it's not a bad thing to get every 6 to 12 months just to check under the hood of some things that are going on, especially if you're, I don't know, supplementing with vitamin D, for example. Although I think it's pretty hard to overdo vitamin D supplementation, but maybe you're doing so, especially if you're supplementing like, I don't know, some of these supplements that are a bit out there or high doses above general recommendations, it might not be a wise thing to do. But yeah, like you said, definitely I've used it in cases where people have had symptoms where I can't understand why they necessarily should. I guess just similar to like, I don't know, if you have any sort of ache or pain somewhere, you go get it checked by the doctor. It's not a bad idea to go do that. The final thing I wanted to touch on here was it's a very in vogue topic is ultra processed foods. I don't know if any thoughts immediately come to mind. It brings me back to the whole clean versus dirty food kind of chats and discussions, where it's a case of like, hey, trying to put that towards one food is not particularly helpful, misses the forest for the trees a little bit. I don't know if you guys have any particular thoughts surrounding kind of ultra processed foods. And it's funny, I saw something recently as M&S, so Marks and Spencer's over here in the UK, and they started having some cereals. They had like cornflakes, and it was basically just saying it's one ingredient, it's just corn. And it's like it's almost promoting as if that is now, it's now a health food because it's one ingredient, versus cornflakes had salt and some other like potentially vitamins and minerals fortified in it, which I don't know if this version does. And it was just like, I feel like people are missing the forest for the trees again with this, but I might have already driven you in a certain direction with this discussion, Milo.
Yeah, no, and I fully get it. I do think that nowadays people are growing more concerned about, the number of ingredients on the ingredient list is a strong predictor of how healthy the food is for you. Look, ultimately, foods that are more processed and have more ingredients, on average, the ingredients being added or being added for mostly one of two reasons. One is to make it taste better, and two is to make it more shelf stable. The latter is probably a good thing as far as reducing waste, or just making things easier to use. The former, from the research, things that taste good also make it easier to overeat. Like palatability of food is a big factor in the research. If you serve people 2 meals across many studies, and one of them is more palatable, the other one is less palatable, when left to their own devices, just told, hey, eat as much as you want, people will consume a fair bit more calories in the higher palatability foods than the lower palatability foods. So as non-sexy as it is, making your diet taste worse is a good way to make a diet easier as far as losing weight goes. It just so happens to be that, and I'm not going to go into evolutionary stuff because I'm not at all qualified to go into that, but it just so happens to be that the things that are higher in calories also tend to taste better. And the brain is probably pretty well developed to detect that. And so when you're cutting and you're eating low-calorie foods, they taste worse and you'll eat less of them. And so, like, generally I do get that people will see ultra-processed foods, and sometimes recognizing the research on palatability will say, well, that is worse because it makes you overconsume calories and therefore at the end of the day causes worse health outcomes because you eat more calories, potentially you start undermining your diet's vegetable and food intake because you're having so many more calories from processed foods that you either are no longer hungry for less tasty foods, or you don't have the calories for them, or you just end up overconsuming calories in general, which as a standalone will cause weight gain eventually, and that is also net negative. But I think that when people start to really hone in and obsess over individual food additives, sometimes there might very well be a reason for it, right? Like some food additives may very well cause harm. But ultimately, for many of these food additives, they are being researched, they are generally being judged as safe, and I think it mostly does come back down to, one, the magnitude of effect thing, where, as we mentioned earlier, people tend to focus on the smaller items than the larger items. So larger ticket items like being more physically active, that can have a very, very, very profound impact on your overall health. Minor consumption of certain food additives that may or may not increase risk for some things, especially if it's in the context of a well-balanced diet, consuming some of that food additive will generally increase risk somewhere between not at all to a very, very, very marginal extent. And yet people will often, as you said earlier, generally people who are more inclined towards being interested in sort of conspiracy theories and whatnot, focus more heavily on the food additives than those bigger ticket items. So yeah, I think that avoiding ultra-processed foods for the most part might be a good thing as far as keeping calorie intake down, making sure that you're mostly eating fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, grains, things that have fiber as well, antioxidants, polyphenols, all that stuff. That is a good thing. But it's also worth keeping in mind that generally there is a difference between, like you said, cereal that has one ingredient and just a literal whole food, like a tomato or a salad. Making sure that you have the 80-20 rule in place, and people, like nowadays, people take it for granted that we are largely following a flexible dieting approach. But as of like 10, 20 years ago, that was much less the case in the lifting space. But as long as you're following the if it fits your macros approach, with an emphasis on keeping it mostly around 80-20, especially in a cut, you will be fine, and the additives usually are nothing to worry about. But I think that also potentially has something to do right now with ongoing movements in the US being a bit more focused on like food dyes and whatnot. So it's a bit of a moment for food additives. But yeah, it does frustrate me, and I think it falls in the same category as the biohacking trends at the moment.
On the US thing, I don't know what food chain it is, but I'm not exactly privy to it, but it was to do with seed oils, and like they're one of these, not McDonald's, but somewhere like that, changed it to like beef tallow or something. But when you actually look at the macros now, it's like the fat is like doubled. And it's just like, it's way more calories. So it's just like, you've just made that food actually worse, because actually, I'm sure you guys agree, the overwhelming evidence for seed oils is that they are not negative towards health. And it's just like people cherry picking certain studies and things like this, which is kind of scary. But yeah, I'll pass the mic to Pac. What have you got? Thoughts on ultra processed foods?
No, I echo Milo. And with seed oil specifically, I was looking into them the other day, and there was 2025 review. Why were you looking into them, you ask? Because I got sued by a bodybuilder in Greece. And he made a video like the other day where he was like, seed oils are the worst thing you can put in your body. And they are the main reason for any carcinogenesis, for the generation of cancer. But then if we look at the literature, things are much like seed oils specifically, and like things like soy oil. Is that what you call it? Soy oil?
Soybean
guess
oil, I
so.
think. Yeah.
Soybean oil, yeah. And even sunflower oil. They can have health benefits. They can lower bad cholesterol. Cooking with them may increase. So there was a study where they looked at habits, people's lifestyle habits, and consuming more processed foods, including foods cooked in sunflower oil that are, often like things like French fries and like processed foods. Yes, there was an increased risk there, as one would expect, but overall, like if you go on TikTok or Instagram, you'll hear these people make these insane claims. But again, 80-20 rule. Like if you're physically active, eating mostly whole foods, getting your fiber in, that the odd McDonald's here and there is not going to do anything. And that's the irony there, that if you're somebody who's built a relatively muscular physique, you are very capable because you're lifting weights and you're much stronger than the average individual. You're also much fitter than the average individual. Your body is able to withstand the odd, chocolate bar or whatever meal out. Like, you're not going to die. And we are very blessed to be living in a time and age where things are much better than people think, in terms of like food fortification, and like it's very difficult to be lacking certain nutrients, even though people may often make that case. But at the same time, you obviously have the other side, the negative side, which is a lot of high palatable foods that are very, very easily available. But yeah, butter and plant-based oils intake and mortality, which was published in 2025, actually showed that seed oils are not as bad as people make them out to be.
Yeah, I think it comes back to like people are scared of like, oh, words I can't pronounce, and that if your grandmother can't like pronounce it or can't understand what it is, you shouldn't be eating it. And it's that almost naturalistic fallacy to some extent. And I think boiling it back down to that 80-20 rule is great, because that also covers similar to if you're a certain level of active, doing a certain number of steps. Doing more than that is unlikely to really benefit you, similar to if you're having like your 10 fruit and veg, meeting your fiber intake, you're hitting your protein, you're not eating excessive calories, you can have a cookie, so long as it's like not take you into an excessive surplus type of thing. And then my, I guess, grumble comes from people who they'll make a cookie at home and make it not contain certain ingredients. Let's use the example of Reese's. I don't know if you guys have seen it, where it's like a Reese's cup and then they have like a healthy pip and nut kind of Reese's cup, where it's like it's still chocolate and like peanut butter. It's still lots of calories. Like it's still calorie dense. And exchanging those two, like you're not suddenly healthy now you're eating that. And it's similar to like people spending excessive money on organic food, for example. And it's like, but that's not going to benefit your health all that much, and you should be just buying more fruit and veg in general and spending it there versus trying to have organic food and then being cheap in other areas. So yeah, it just seems to be another new confusion for the general public, but I think many of our listeners are pretty able to understand it and see that it's a repeat of the cycle of clean and dirty foods. I guess as a final topic for you guys, because we've been recording an hour and I actually was intending to do an overrated, underrated podcast with you guys, but we kind of done that with health and that subject. But to finish on the topic of foods, I wanted to throw some at you. So I'm just going to throw like a thing at you and see where you're at with it. And these are going to be random. So air fryers. Overrated, underrated, Milo. Go for it.
Overrated. As far as I understand, and I am a hobbyist cook. I have read some food science stuff and whatnot. Air fryers are effectively glorified convection ovens, but like on your countertop. So you could largely achieve the same thing with your oven if you have a fan setting. So yeah, as far as like taking up counter space, I don't have one. I don't use one for that reason. As far as being convenient and being a bit quicker to warm up than an oven, because an oven is larger and it takes a while to warm up and whatnot, I hear it. So for lifters, I'd say adequately rated, maybe. And for the general population, I'd say overrated. Because like, Nah, I'd say overrated overall, actually, just because of counter space constraint. I think most people do just, like, you get your Ninja Creamy, as I'm sure you have one as well now, Steve. You get your air fryer, you get a few things, and all of a sudden, my tiny apartment doesn't have space anymore for anything on the counter, and that's very sad, and then that makes me not cook anymore, because I can't fit a cutting board on there. So, opportunity cost. So I'm going to say overrated.
Pack, where are you at?
I think appropriately rated with a slight, not inclination, but somewhat closer to overrated based on the amount of content and stuff that I see about the air fryer. I think it's cool. I don't cook personally, but we have an air fryer at home that is used for a bunch of stuff. It makes life easier, but it would be unfair for me to say much. I think properly rated overall. But yeah, then you get the Ninja Creamy, which we also have. And it's true, the amount of products that are exist in the kitchen, I'm like, okay.
My next one was going to be a Ninja Creamy. For me, air fryers, I think, are overrated, but that's my experience with it. I've had one for ages. My mum got me it when they were like all the rage, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, and they still continue to be a big thing, which makes me think there's got to be something to it, because I could see the same said for Ninja Creamies, where they've had so much hype over the years, but I don't think it's overrated. I think it's amazing because I've used it every day since I've got it, basically. So, like, quite literally every day, apart from when I was on holiday. So, where are you guys at with the Ninja Creamy? And in addition to that, your favorite or go-to recipe for it?
So I don't have one. I will probably eventually get one. As I understand it, the Ninja Creamy is quite a bit better than just trying to make ice cream in your freezer, and it has to do with the rate of cooling and therefore the crystal formation when you're trying to make ice cream just putting it in the freezer versus using something like a Ninja Creamy. So I'd say, because of how highly rated it is, I'm still going to say just like appropriately rated for this one, because it does actually have its place, I think, if you like ice cream. I'm just not that big of an ice cream person, but that's a personal thing. But I think Ninja Creamies get a thumbs up, and they get to go into the next round. Pack, what do you think as a proud owner?
Yeah, a good one for my wife as a gift. And at first, because she wasn't aware of she's also a fitness enthusiast and lifter. And at first, because she wasn't aware of the Ninja Creamy, because she's not on social media much, she thought, whatever, yeah, okay. More or less the same thing as making an ice cream by yourself and putting it in the freezer. But then she was shocked, and it became one of her favorite cooking utensils. I don't eat the ice cream from the Ninja Creamy because I'm a weirdo. I prefer the little protein ice cream that has 340 to 425 calories and 20 grams of protein, because, I don't know, they've nailed the taste, and it's good macros as well. But yeah, she absolutely loves it, and I've heard only the best about the Ninja Creamy. When I think we have the deluxe version, so we are better than people that have the normal ones.
You're officially better than me because I have the normal one. Part of me was thinking I'd get the normal one because it would constrain me to a smaller size tub, because if you make it, you're going to eat the whole tub anyway. And for prep, I was like, that's going to be a good move for me. But yeah, that's a shame you just went back to using the little ice creams. Not a shame, I guess. At least you're not doing Halo Top, because that is wildly overpriced and that is overrated for sure.
Halo Top is nice, but it used to be nicer when it was cheaper. So...
yeah, what is it now? It's like £6 for a tub, maybe more.
Yeah,
and you're gonna eat the whole thing in one go.
£6? Are you mad? That's $8 nearly. Yeah, you crazy? Like the little one, because what they did with Halo Top 1, at some point the rollout was heavy in the UK. We had Halo Top everywhere. Then something happened and it became more scarce. And then they also changed the recipe, so it's not a high protein ice cream. And it's just, it's just relatively low calorie with like 10 grams of protein. But when you have competitors like the brand that works exclusively with Lidl, as well as other brands like Aldi protein ice cream and all that stuff, where you get it for half the price, you get 25 grams of protein per tub and a similar amount of calories. I don't know. Yeah, it was a bit upsetting.
I need to try the Lidl. There's a Lidl right by me. I need to try that protein ice cream.
Go and try. There's the peanut butter one, salted caramel one. The salted caramel one is like 300 and something calories for 500 milliliters of ice cream. And honestly, if you were to give it to me and say, hey, this is a normal ice cream, I wouldn't be like, wow, this is the best ice cream I've ever had. But it would get a solid 6 out of 10 with regular ice cream standards, which is pretty high, assuming that 10 is like
gelato from Rome.
yeah.
Something like that. Kinder Bueno, something like this. So, yeah, I think that's fair. I haven't had it for ages because I've just relied on the Ninja Creamy so long. Now, if you guys still have time, I have just high protein foods in general, overrated or underrated, because I've seen them getting quite a bit of hate recently.
I mean, protein in general is still underrated. Shout out Tagawa et al. 2020. And now Rafalo et al. 2025, baby.
True.
Like, it's the same as with volume, where we don't have a lot of certainty about the top end of the protein stuff. Like, oh, how much do you truly need to maximize, right? Because we don't have many studies in the context of lifting on super high protein intakes. But it does seem like in a surplus, at least 1.1 grams per pound is required. And in a cut, based on the Rafalo study, I mean, they found improved fat-free mass retention all the way to 4.2 grams per kilogram, I believe, which is pretty high. That's per kilogram fat-free mass, if I'm not mistaken. It's 3.2 for body weight. But 3.2 grams per kilogram of body weight is still quite high. That's, for me, that would be right around 320 grams of protein. Now, when it comes to high protein food specifically, I'm assuming you mean like the fucking Snickers bars that have high protein and whatnot. I'm gonna say overrated. They very rarely taste as good as the regular like Snickers bars or whatever, but they also don't have enough protein to really warrant the deviation. They're also oftentimes more expensive. So the only time I'd really see a rationale for having them is in the context of a calorie-constrained diet where you're also trying to achieve high protein, but you hate having high protein foods. Like, straight up my diet I'm cutting right now, I will have 1 kilogram of fat-free yogurt twice a day with just sweetener. And hey, that's a way to cut. That's a way to get 180 grams of protein nearly in 2 meals. You know? And obviously, meat is expensive, and maybe you appreciate the 10 grams of protein from your Snickers bar. Perhaps you do. And that's fine, but outside of that context, I think it's overrated. It's expensive for the amount of protein you get. It tastes worse than the regular version. It's effectively a marketing term at this point. So I would just get more protein in from actual protein foods and enjoy your food.
Yeah, I tend to agree. There are some products that are cool. Like, I get this milk from a Polish shop, which is normal milk, but like skim, like it's almost zero fat and more protein. So like per 100 milliliters, you get 8 grams of protein. So then you can make a shake with 400 milliliters of that and 2 scoops of whey, and you have like 75 grams of protein or something. Those sorts of products, cool. But yeah, the Snickers bar, like, we don't need the Snickers protein bar. We have protein bars, like, especially in the UK and the US, you go to a gas station and you get really solid tasting protein bars. Why get the Snickers bars that doesn't have 25 grams of protein, has 12, still has high calories, is not a Snickers bar, it's not really a protein bar, and it's something in between. Not a big fan. But there are some products like, protein cheese. Obviously, cheese has protein already, but they've made lower fat, even higher protein options. In those cases, I think that's cool, but that's different to protein, like protein cereal as well. I like. We don't have good products in the UK, but in the US, they have some really solid products. However, to Milo's point, those are much more expensive. So it's like, okay, if you're going to be spending all that money, if you're balding, fair enough. But otherwise, cool. Just have an extra scoop of whey and you're covered.
One caveat to all the above. Fairlife chocolate milk is still the best chocolate milk I've ever had, while having like 70 grams of protein per bottle. So yeah, that is the one exception to the rule here.
I have to say, have you had cereal from like the high protein cereals? Yeah. They're
it's the
very
one my
sweet.
mother gave us.
Yeah, they're expensive though. I got
They're
gifted
very expensive.
those for Christmas, I think, like a whole set. They work very well as a creamy mix-in. Very good. adds nice bit of crunch and volume
But again,
and
bro,
protein.
like you are getting, it's a small package overall.
Oh
So
yeah,
it's
they're
like,
tiny.
I regard them as a meal. Like, okay, today,
They're
no,
compact.
honestly, like today I feel like cereal. I'll have the whole box, which was like around 1,000 something calories and a bunch of protein. But other than that, like to pay so much money for the 15, like a few extra grams of protein per small bowl, whatever, man. Just
Yeah.
have your regular cereal and add a bit of whey.
I think context sounds like it's appropriate here, where there's some areas like protein ice cream, I think is like very useful, or any of the protein yogurts and things like this. They're pretty damn great. The mousses, protein puddings, like they're a nice way of doing it. But like you said, the Snickers, you're better off just having a Snickers and a protein shake probably than trying to get it that way. But some people might prefer that somehow, but they're definitely not as nice.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
just on that note, I think generally the high protein variants of foods that are dairy based tend to be pretty okay. Like high protein ice creams, high protein mousses, high protein yogurts, high protein chocolate milk and whatnot. But generally, if it's trying to replace a sweet that isn't quite as heavily dairy based, I find that it doesn't taste nearly as good, and it kind of lacks on the protein front as well, usually.
Yeah. Last one, guys. Avocados. Overrated or underrated?
I am a man of convenience, and cutting open an avocado is entirely too much work for me. So I'm going to say overrated. Also relatively high calorie for a fruit or a vegetable or whatever it ends up being, I guess. So yeah, I'm going to say it's also relatively expensive, I think. So I'm going to say overrated on the whole in terms of both financially speaking and in terms of nutritionally speaking and in terms of convenience. So I'm going to say overrated.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm also Greek, so hey, extra virgin olive oil, a lot of literature backing up its health benefits. Just sprinkle a bit on top of your meal, you get the healthy fats. I like avocado, don't get me wrong. Look, if or when, to manifest, when we become trillionaires, I'll be buying all sorts of like expensive protein snacks and avocados and whatever. But yeah, avocado is a bit of a hype sort of, oh, let's go for brunch, avocado with toast sort of food. It's cool. I like avocado, but I don't think it's anything insane.
For me, it is underrated in our community, like bodybuilders. Bodybuilders are all about nuts, nut butters, dark chocolate. I think dark chocolate's overrated generally. I love dark chocolate, don't get me wrong, but it's way overhyped as like a healthy fat source. I'm like, hey, there's much better fat sources out there in terms of like health benefits. So I love avocado, but you're completely right. In the general space, it's way overhyped for what it is. And especially, like you said, because it is so calorie dense, I think people don't quite like understand. You could eat probably a Snickers or two for like a big avocado, where you just put that on a bit of toast and you think, hey, I've had a super healthy meal here. It's super high in fiber though. I didn't quite appreciate that on some sourdough, which is also high in fiber. You get quite a bit of fiber there. But anyway, I digress. Thank you guys so much for your time. Been a lot of fun doing a bit of a quick fire round at the end there with the overrated, underrated, and yeah, diving into the health area I think has been really interesting and great. And I wish you guys all the best with your app and everything that's going on there. If people want to keep up to date with that, they don't miss launch, where should they be heading? And then obviously your social media in general, if they aren't already following you two great gents. Go for it, Milo.
Yeah, myoadapt.com. On myoadapt.com, you can sign up to get notified on launch. We're both on Instagram, Dr. Pack for me, Wolf Coach for Milo, Dr. Milo Wolf on YouTube for Milo, Dr. Pack on YouTube for me. And you will, if you're following us, even if you haven't signed up to the launch list, you will know when MyoAdapt is out. But yeah, almost weekly videos from myself, every other week from Milo, lots of memes, content, research updates. Yeah, it's all about science-based lifting and educating people who want to, make gains.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you
if people
for having
haven't
us.
seen it, I was on Pack's channel not that long ago. We did a training session together, and I should also be on a couple at some point with Milo, which I'm very appreciative of being invited out there and doing those. Hopefully we can get something going again. And thank you again both for your time and for your work. Cheers guys for listening.